Welcome back. Welcome back. It's time again. It's time again for What Moves the Dead. It. Our last reading left me thinking a lot. Left me thinking a lot. And the world that this man has built is just, it's astonishing to me. I am excited to get through. We're starting chapter 4 here today. Got through chapter 3 last time. Chapter 4 today, at least through chapter 6 and maybe beyond. We'll see what happens. But I'm excited. I can't wait. You can't wait. We can't wait. Let's go. Chapter 4. So here I was. Roderick hadn't expected me, whatever that meant. Possibly that he hadn't thought I was enough of a friend to come when he needed me, or perhaps he didn't think he needed me. Maybe he didn't. Didn't know anything what to, didn't know what to make of me. Madeline was, yes, dying. I looked in the faces of enough dying soldiers to know. Sometimes people surprise you, sometimes they pull through, but there's a particular waxiness to human skin that tells you when someone is not long for this world. Madeline's was starting to acquire that texture. If I came down to breakfast tomorrow and discovered that she had died during the night, I would not have been shocked. Saddened, but never shocked. When I am perturbed, I like to walk. I feel slow and stupid when I sit, but walking seems to wake something up in my brain. I never minded pacing back and forth with a rifle on guard duty, because I could think more clearly. Daydream even, if I'm honest. Mostly I daydreamed about the end of the war, about scenarios where all my people made it out alive and unharmed. It was only when we were pinned down and I could not walk that it became harder for me to keep those dreams alive. I did not particularly wish to walk the halls of Usher's mansion. The tattered wallpaper, the specks of mold, Madeline with her feverish eyes and wisps of white hair. None of these things I wished to encounter. So I rose early and saddled Hob and went out for a ride. Hob greeted me more eagerly than usual, possibly because Denton's horse in the next stall was a terrible conversationalist, or perhaps because the stable was so gloomy. It was clean and fairly dry, but it had the same sullen air as the rest of the manor house. I don't like that manor house. The air of the heath was cool and damp. Excuse me, good lord. The air of the heath was cool and damp. I might have found it oppressively silent under normal circumstances, but compared to what we had left behind, it felt free and open. Mist clung to the surface of the dark lake and gathered in hollows on the ground, but Hob cantered through them and broke them up like shreds of bad dreams. My thoughts, unfortunately, did not break up as easily. The Ushers were not well, any fool could see that. The house was obviously terrible for anyone who was sick. Miasma, as my great-grandmother would have said. Of course, it was 1890, and no one really believed in that anymore. It was all germs now, thanks to Dr. Koch. Still, germs could linger in a place, could they not? Was there enough disinfectant in the world to cleanse the House of Usher? So, what did I do about it? I couldn't very well kidnap the Ushers and drag them back to Paris at gunpoint. Madeline wouldn't survive. Roderick probably would and be better for it, but Denton would undoubtedly object. And you can't exactly threaten to shoot someone to save their life. Angus would be extremely sarcastic if I tried. Burning down the House of Usher, while tempting, had similar practical problems. I grimaced. Hob slowed down, feeling me shifting in the saddle, and put one ear back in inquiry. Sorry, boy, I said. I'm not good company today. Hob's ears were the equine equivalent of a shrug. Horses don't understand a lot about the world, but I've found that they sometimes understand particular humans terrifyingly well. Mules understand a lot more about the world, but less about humans, or possibly just don't care what humans think. I'd buy either explanation, really. We trotted across the countryside, steering clear of patches of the stinking red gills. They thinned out as we left the tarn behind, and then began to increase again as I turned Hob back toward the manor house. Where one finds mushrooms, one sometimes also finds redoubtable English ladies. I saw the umbrella first, then Miss Potter sitting under it. She had a sketchbook in her lap and was staring intently at a brown lump. I slid from Hobbs' back and looped his reins over the saddle. Stand, I said. Hob gave me a look, saying this was unnecessary, as there was nowhere in this desolate countryside he particularly wished to go. Miss Potter dabbed carefully at the sketchbook. She was working from a small tin of pigments, and I could see the pages of the book were wavy with the marks of watercolor washes. Unless it is urgent, officer, I will be with you in a few moments, she called. The paint is wet, and I do not wish for it to dry before I have finished up this study. Please take your time, I said. There is nothing so urgent that I would interrupt your painting. She gave a short, occupied nod and bent over her watercolors. Temporarily dismissed, I ambled over to the lake. The water was still dark and not entirely reflective. Patches seemed matte, as if the lake itself was moldering. The house squatted on the far side. I picked up a pebble and tossed it into one of the matte places. It landed and sank, the ripples almost stopping instantly. I tried skipping a rock across it. The first skip went well enough and left the correct ripples, but the second seemed to land in something gelatinous, and the rock vanished into the water. Algae mats, I believe, said Miss Potter, coming up beside me. The lake is full of them. How are you doing, Officer Easton? Lieutenant Easton, please, I said, or simply Easton if you like. Lieutenant? She inclined her head. I smiled. Most Englishwomen of my acquaintance would have been pinned down by enemy fire for 3 days before they would consent to call a companion merely Easton, and even then they would revert to titles at the moment anyone else was present. The lake spread out at our feet. It was so still. I'm used to tiny ripples in any body of water this size, and the flatness was unsettling. There was even a slight breeze that should have caused ripples by rights. It tugged at my hair and set the ribbons on Miss Potter's hat dancing. Are there mushrooms underwater? I asked abruptly. I regretted it as soon as the words were out of my mouth. It seemed like a child's question, but Miss Potter did not treat it that way. A complex question. The simple answer is that we probably do not know of any. Probably. I tilted my gaze toward her. She had a slight frown. Probably. The mycelium networks of mushrooms do not seem to enjoy being completely submerged. Several people have grown mushrooms on logs that were submerged in aquaria, but we must presume that the fungus itself was present on the log before it was placed in the water. Also, her frown shifted into what in another woman might have been a curled lip of disgust. Also, there is an American, she said, pronouncing the word with distaste, who claims to have seen gilled mushrooms in a river in their far west. But his report is unsubstantiated by any reputable observer. It must have been terribly galling to be barred from an organization merely because one lacked the proper genitals, when disreputable Americans were allowed to join and write about underwater mushrooms. I had encountered English women with similar feelings about the military. One of them had gone on to move to Galatia and swear as a soldier, and more power to Khan. Is there some reason mushrooms wouldn't grow underwater, besides the mycelium? Spores float, said Miss Potter simply. They might well come to the rest along the banks, but they could not sink to the bottom of the river to grow there. It would have been like growing a coconut tree at the bottom of the ocean. My accent is terrible today. She tapped her parasol against the pebbles on the beach. That said, mushrooms are not the only fungus. There are many, many types in this world. We walk constantly in a cloud of their spores, bringing them in. They inhabit the air, the water, the earth, even our very bodies. I felt suddenly queasy. She must have read my expression, because a rare smile spread across her face. Don't be squeamish, Lieutenant. Beer and wine require yeast, as does bread. Fair enough. So there is fungus in water, then? Oh, yes, a great deal of it. Mostly we recognize it when it becomes parasitic upon something else. Fish, for example. There are many fungi that plague the keepers of aquaria, causing growths upon their fish. It is not my field, but I know 3 or 4. Mostly they cause scabrous patches, but I have seen fungus that grows like a puff of cotton on the fins of fish, or sprouting forth from their mouth or lungs. How distressing, I said. Certainly for the fish, I would imagine. Though I do not know if fish have the intelligence to be distressed. Perhaps they simply believe that the fungus is part of them and their fins have become larger. I'm just going to cut the accent. I'm tired of trying it. I shook my head. And is there fungus here, in the tarn? Undoubtedly. You would likely require a microscope to observe it, however. I don't suppose you have one lying around, Miss Potter? In among your paints, perhaps? She smiled again, though fleetingly. I fear they're beyond my means. I must content myself with a magnifying glass. She tapped her parasol again, in much the manner one might a cane. You must think me a bit mad to be so obsessed with the kingdom of fungi, but it is a fascinating world. And an important one. Our civilization is built on the back of yeasts. I do not think you're mad at all, I said, which was true. I enjoy the passions of others vicariously. One of the most pleasant interludes I have ever spent was listening to the treatise, I don't know this word. Treatise of an aging shepherd once delivered to me on inferiority of other breeds of sheep, and this is much more general appeal. High praise! She hid a chuckle behind one gloved hand. I wished I dared to initiate the piss and shit in the flaps of they hide speech for her, but I had no wish to alienate the redoubtable Miss Potter. I looked across the lake instead and saw a pale white shape emerge from a little door near the lake. Madeline? It must have been, unless one of the servants wore white. The shape made its way slowly down the water, not stopping until it was at the edge. I could not make out whether or not it was actually touching the lake. I felt an urge to hop on Hob and ride back at a gallop to stop her from touching the water. Surely wet feet could do her no good in her condition. Surely that water could do no one any good, regardless of their condition. But what could I do? Anemia, Din had said. The treatment for anemia, so far as I knew, was good red meat. There's precious little of that in the House of Usher. I didn't know how to fix catalepsy, but red meat I could manage. The only trick was how to get it into the larder. I took leave of Miss Potter, pausing to compliment her painting. She turned the compliment aside with a practiced air. I'm well enough. You should have seen my niece Beatrix, twice the talent in an artist's eye, and a very gratifying interest in mycology. I mounted my horse and rode back to the house, looking for Angus to put my plan in action. So we'll say you shot it, I said, as we approached the house that evening. Like hell we will, said Angus. I'd take a bullet for you, same I did your father, but damned if I'll have you besmirch my shooting to a knob. He's not a knob, he's Roderick. We all had the runs together over the same trench. He's Lord Usher now, and I don't care how much shit we passed, I'll not take the blame for this one. I drew breath to argue, but he added, and I did the negotiating, did I not? I sighed. His accent was getting thicker, and that was never a good sign. Fine, fine. Come in with me and make it convincing. It had been a ridiculous plan, but straightforward enough. I walked into the parlor and found Roderick sitting alone at the piano, toying with the keys in a desultory function. Roderick, I said, I fear I've got a confession to make. He looked up, his pale eyebrows drawing together. A confession? What do you mean? Well, you know, Angus and I went hunting this afternoon. He nodded. After birds, yes. Well, I drew out the moment, took a deep breath, and said, Roderick, I shot a bloody cow. Roderick stared at me blankly. I told Khan it were never a deer, said Angus, his accent even more pronounced than usual. But does Kyle listen to me? Me, who thought Khan to shoot at me very knee? It was one of the little brown ones that they have around here, I said, exasperated. I didn't have to fake the exasperation. Angus was laying it on thick. They're deer-colored, and it wasn't very big, and it had its head down. Those hip bones were never a deer. And did I not teach you to never shoot before you had the shot absolutely clean? If you were a recruit, I'd box your ears for it. Better that than you kill a man. Regardless, I did not kill a man, I said frostily. I turned back to Roderick. I paid the cow's owner twice what it was worth, but I'm terribly sorry if this makes trouble for you with your people. I genuinely thought it was a deer. Angus muttered something into his mustache. Roderick's lips had begun to twitch and his shoulders shook. Anyway, I said, giving Angus a hard look. There'll be a delivery from the butcher in a day or so. From the butcher, said Roderick in a high, strangled voice. I hunched my shoulders. Angus aimed a cuff at the back of my head. Well, then I taught Khan what you eat, what you shoot. You know Nob to go hunting the little beasties for sport, begging pardon, Lord Usher, but leaving the poor creature where it falls. He made me field dress the cow, I said to Roderick. This was too much for my old friend. He let out a howl of laughter and fell back against the piano, clutching his chest and gasping. I folded my arms and failed to smother a smile. Angus, said Roderick when he finally stopped laughing. Angus, you old devil, you haven't changed by a hair. Field dress the cow. This set him off again. I said with as much dignity as I could muster, am going to wash the cow off my boots and trousers. And the rest of me. I stalked to the door, leaving Roderick collapsed over the piano. Angus followed me, uttering dark commentary on my field dressing of the cow, which I wished to state for the record was perfectly adequate. Phew, I said, when we were safely out of earshot. That went well. Aye, that laugh will do him good. And a good piece of beef will do her ladyship good as well. Angus's accent had returned to its normal proportions. Not a bad plan, youngster. It was a bloody stupid plan, I said, but it did the job. I couldn't very well just have a side of beef delivered to the house. Pity you couldn't have shot a younger one, said Angus a bit sadly. The cow they sold us will be tough as a boot. We will chew that boot with a glad heart. Oh, aye, we will. I endured a great deal of ribbing at dinner from Roderick and Denton, which I tolerated because it made Madeline laugh. Now this, said Roderick, indicating the chicken on the table, this is not a deer, Easton. I feel we must be clear on that. Perfectly. Nor am I a deer. No, of course not. I rolled my eyes at Madeline. Deer are the ones that go moo. She giggled. It was still the papery giggle of an invalid, but it was a genuine humor, and I'd take it. She retired early, before it was barely dark. I hoped that once the butcher actually delivered the sacrificial cow, she'd be able to eat enough meat to do her good. I also sought my bed early, pleading exhaustion from the cow incident. 2 hours later, saw me still awake, though. I kept mulling over something that the cow's owner had said to me earlier. I should have been able to dismiss it, but it stuck like an eyelash in the corner of my eye. Minor, but maddening. We had finished the butchery. For all my complaints about field dressing, I'd had help, since cows are a great deal larger than deer, and the farmer's younger sons were carting loads of meat to the butcher. The farmer and his oldest son, nearly identical to his father, stood beside me watching. Young man, said the cow's previous owner, and stopped. I didn't bother to correct him. It's less galling to be mistaken for a man than a woman for some reason. Probably because no one tries to kiss your hand or bar you from the Royal Mycology Society. And I'm familiar with this sort of fellow who are the salt of the earth and move on a similar geological time frame. I waited. You're not afraid of working, said the farmer at last, nodding to the wreckage of the cow. I smiled. I may be staying up at the manor house, but I'm no noble. I don't get to lie around eating peeled grapes. He fixed me with a penetrating look. Your man speaks well of you, Angus. This was gratifying, but I didn't think the farmer had drawn me aside merely to pass on Angus's praise. I waited some more. Said you talked about hunting hares. I thought of it, I admitted. A cow wasn't my first thought, and I'm grateful that you were willing to sell us one. I had also been grateful that Angus had located this man who, he said, was not prone to gossip and would make sure that word of my clandestine arrangement to buy beef for the Usher larder would not get back to Roderick's ears. He waved off my gratitude and lapsed back into a silence. I gazed over the field, which was far healthier looking than the land around the manor house. I could hear insects singing in the grass, and a bird flitted among the low bushes at the edges. The hares around the lake aren't canny. I tilted my head. Angus said that he'd heard that they don't act right. I decided not to mention which hares out of fear he'd think I was mocking him. His son finally spoke up. They're not so bad around here, he said, but you go up toward the house and they get strange. Strange? I asked. Strange how? They don't run, said the son. If they move, it's slow. I walked right up to one once, and when it finally moved, it was like it didn't know how its legs worked. Fell over a few times. Sounds like a disease, I offered. Please, God, let there not be a rabies outbreak up here on top of everything else. Not rabies. Rabies doesn't make them watch you. The farmer leveled a finger at me. And they watch all the time. Not the way hares stare at you and bolt if you move. They'll come up to you and watch. The missus saw one down here once, came right up to the dairy and stood and stared at her. She knew it was one of the ones from the lake by how it moved. I rocked back on my heels, startled by this sudden flurry of words. I followed one once, said the son. It'd get to walking pretty good, and then it would miss a step and fall over and kick. It'd see it jump, and then it'd have to stop and think about how to go over it. Sometimes it didn't jump, it just walked through the ditch. I just kept on to see where it was going. And where was it going? I asked. Don't know, said the son. Got to the lake and fell in. Couldn't seem to figure out how to swim. Just laid down on the bottom and drowned in 3 inches of water. These were strange thoughts, but there was a little that I could do about them. If some strange disease was afflicting the local hares, that was a job for the veterinarian rather than a veteran. I was half asleep and headed for 3/4 when I... Good God. I was half asleep and headed for 3/4 when I heard a board creak in the hallway. It might not have registered, except that a second board creaked a moment later, close enough to whoever was setting the boards creaking was moving very slowly indeed. Someone was creeping down the hall. I catapulted into consciousness and reached for my sidearm on the nightstand. There are people who sleep with a loaded gun under their pillow, and I have nothing much to say about that, except that I would choose not to share a bed with them. When I was 19 and had seen a few battles myself and thought myself very hardened and worldly, I myself slept with a sidearm under my pillow. This lasted until the night that the damn thing discharged under my ear. If I had been sleeping with my head on the other half of the pillow, I would probably not be telling you this story now, but I escaped unharmed. The pillow exploded into a blizzard of feathers, and the bullet took out the lamp and buried itself in my closet door. I had just enough presence of mind to grab my luggage before I was thrown out on the street by the proprietress, who screamed at me for 5 minutes straight. Unfortunately for her, I was completely deafened and so missed the nuance of her diatribe, but the hand gestures were very clear. My tinnitus probably dates to this particular episode, and thus I cannot blame anyone for it but myself. I opened the door a crack and peered both ways. No one. Except for an instant, I thought I saw a white form trailing out of sight around a corner. I have, as I have told you, the reader, the psychic sensitivities of mud. It did not occur to me that I might be hallucinating or that I might be seeing a ghost. Someone was walking through the halls at night, and that someone must be real and alive. And yet, having said this, I must admit that something must have been acting on my nerves, because why else would I have gone in pursuit holding a loaded pistol? It was more than likely a servant. Servants are up at all hours, making sure that everyone's shoes are blackened and the fires are laid. Granted, I had so far only seen one servant, but presumably there were more. So why did I automatically assume it was an intruder? I moved as stealthily as I could, which was not very. The blackboards creaked and yawned underfoot. I might as well have hired a brass band to play a march. When I rounded the corner, there was no one there. Doorways lined the hall, and there was a stairway down to the lower floor. The person might have gone anywhere. I strained my ears for the creak of floorboards and instead got a wave of tinnitus ringing over me. My own damn fault. Listen too hard, tense the wrong muscle in my jaw, and it kicks off every time. Which you'd think I know by now. The ringing faded. I stood in the dark, my pistol braced against nothing, and then crept back into bed, feeling foolish indeed. And that's chapter 4. Quick pause. I love it. I'm really enjoying the writing style in this. My head is really, if you hear me flubbing words, it's because I'm reading ahead, and my head is like, I'm in the place. I'm in the manor house. I'm seeing it all happen. I'm seeing it all shake down. I'm having a ball. Chapter 5. I slept late the next day. Butchering a cow was no joke. I rode out on Hob and didn't join me for his gelding, which resembled a piece of overstuffed furniture with ears. I had the pleasure of introducing Din to the redoubtable Miss Potter, who was taking a spore print of a mushroom. Ah, she said, leaning on her furled umbrella. A doctor, are you? Of medicine, not mycology, I fear, I said. Din had the grace to look abashed. Miss Potter generously forgave him both this failing and his poor luck to hail from America, with its spurious claims of underwater mushrooms. Here attending Usher's sister, she asked. If Denton was surprised at the speed at which gossip carries across the heath, he did not show it. For all the good I do, he said. It is God's hands, not mine, perhaps not even his. If this impiety shocked her, Miss Potter gave no sign. She nodded gravely and changed the subject. Admittedly, she changed it to fungi, but I was willing to accept it. Denton also requested a demonstration of the stinking red gill, and this time I stayed very well back and held the horses. No pantomime players could have improved upon the play. Miss Potter, resolute, Denton staggering backward and throwing his sleeve across his face as if struck by acid. I enjoyed it enormously. It was as I was leading the horses toward them after the smell had time to dissipate that I saw another hare sitting up in the grass. I looked at it. It looked at me. It seemed completely normal as hares go, which is to say half-starved with staring orange eyes. If it had some strange malady, it was not immediately visible. Are you a witch, then? I asked the animal, half amused. I was not expecting an answer, and I didn't get one. It sat up on its hind legs with its forepaws against its chest and simply watched. Go on, shoot, I said, waving a hand toward it, before I forget that I told Angus I wouldn't hunt hares. It didn't move. I stamped a foot at it. It still didn't move. March hares are all mad, of course, but it wasn't March, and their madness tends to be much more active, leaping and boxing and bounding in all directions. This one was so still that if the breeze had not moved its fur, I would think it might be dead. It did not even twitch its ears, and I had not seen it blink. I took a few steps toward it, and finally it did move, but not like any four-legged animal I'd ever seen. I put out one front foot and seemed to drag itself forward, and then the other. Then one hind foot catching up, then the other. It looked like a man scaling a sheer cliff but on level ground. Then it turned and sat up again, watching me. Have you no sense, hare? I asked. Its unblinking orange eyes held no answer. Before I could do something thoroughly rash like shoot it, and the thought was starting to cross my mind, Miss Potter and Denton reappeared. Talking to yourself, Easton? Asked Denton. Talking to a hare, I said, pointing, but when I looked back, the animal was gone. The butcher was as good as his word, and the first of the beef graced the table that night. As Angus had predicted, it was tough as boot leather, but the cook managed to make a broth, and I saw with pleasure that Madeline took more of it than she had of the chicken that we had eaten for the past few nights. Angus growled something when I came in. He looked surly even by Angus standards. No luck fishing today? Oh, I had luck, aye, if you can call it that, he said. His mustaches bristled like an angry hedgehog. Caught a fine fish, only it weren't so fine after all. You've lost me, Angus. Had a gob of stuff trailing out of it, he said. Thought 'twere fish shit, and then thought maybe 'twere its guts coming out. Good God, man, what are you using for fish hooks if you were gutting fish with them? My hook, he said with dignity, were in the fish's mouth, where 'twere supposed to be. As clean a cast as ever made, and reeled in proper. I gutted it, and it were through with stuff like slimy felt, including a string hanging out of its arse. This sounded quite disgusting, and I told Angus as much. Yes, he said. Something wrong with the damn fish is what it is. I cut up a second one, and what do you think I saw? Slimy felt? Gobs. He folded his arms. Fish are slimy little devils to begin with, I started to say, but Angus shot me a withering look with both eyes and mustache, and I relented. Angus would know the difference between regular slime and something unusual. I remembered Miss Potter talking about fungus that had attached itself to fish in aquaria. Could be a fungus. I can ask Miss Potter about it if you'd like. Or you can ask her yourself. So far as I know, she's the only English woman stomping about the place looking for mushrooms. But we exchanged a wave, said Angus. I didn't go bothering her, and she didn't go bothering me. A wave, though, from an English woman, that's practically a hearty handshake. She only deigned to speak to me because I was about to poke a mushroom with a stick. The good Lord looks out for fools. In your case, apparently, he sends the occasional Englishwoman. I thought he'd sent you. You're a two-person job, youngster. A thought struck me. You didn't eat the fish, did you? Great blistering Christ, of course not. Do you take me for an idiot? I'm occasionally deficient in tact, but I know better than to answer that. Never, I said. And I retired to my bedchamber while Angus muttered and grumbled about witch hares and fish on strings. I thought of telling him about my encounter with the hair, but what could I say? It looked at me funny. The way it moved was rather horrible. It was cold in the room, and I was still half-dressed when I heard another soft creak of boards as someone passed my door. This time I leapt out of bed, ignoring stealth entirely, and flung the door open. There! A white shape just vanishing. I snatched up a candle and bolted after it, reaching the corner where I had lost it the night before, and saw it, most pale in the dark. It did not enter any of the doors, but moved purposely toward the stairwell. A figure clad in white, I thought. Not a servant unless Roderick had given his servants a uniform more akin to a burial shroud. He carried no candle, but shuffled along, steps oddly halting and yet moving swiftly for all of that, unbothered by the dark. It paid no attention to me as I approached. It was descending the stairs when I finally caught up to it and could make out features beyond ghostly whiteness. White hair, flowing white cloth, skin so pale it was almost transparent. Madeline? I asked. She wore a night rail with small, high sleeves. Until that moment, I had not realized quite how much weight she had lost. The garment hung off her, and what might have been modest enough on a larger woman now fell well below her collarbone. The openings for her arms seemed to gape wide open, revealing a glimpse of her ribs. I prayed that it was shadows that made them stand out so far from her skin. She took another shuffling step downwards, and her hands hanging limply at her sides. Her eyes were open, sweeping from side to side, though I could not tell if they were focused. Was she sleepwalking? Madeline. I glanced around, hoping that no one else could come along and could see her in the state of undress. Certainly not Denton or even Angus. Madeline, can you hear me? She did not reply. Conventional wisdom was that you never wake a sleepwalker, but conventional wisdom had not allowed for a woman walking in the dark in a house with bad floors and a ruined wing and balconies that led directly to a 30-foot drop in the lake. Maddie, please wake up. She looked at me then, though I could not tell if she saw me or if she was looking through me. Her lips pursed and a sound came out with half a whistle, half a question. Who? It's Easton, I said. Though I was not sure if she was speaking to me or if this was something from her dream. She took another step forward. I took hold of her arm and almost dropped it. Her skin was no warmer than the air itself, and if she had not been so obviously alive, I would have thought I touched a corpse. Perhaps that meant that I spoke more harshly than I meant to. Madeline! She stumbled. I clutched at her to keep her upright, feeling her skin too loose under my fingers. Oh God, was I leaving bruises? I looked down at my hand on her arm and suffered another shock. How often does anyone really think of fine hair on a woman's arms? It hardly ever comes up. I suppose women who have particularly thick or dark hair might find it troubling, but I was decades removed from such concerns, and my sister certainly never spoke of it. And on very old people, it seems like the hair simply goes away. Madeline's was bright white, the color of the hair on her head. Same drifting, floating quality. Her skin looked almost pink by comparison. My hand seemed impossibly tan, and the white filaments swirled over it like some kind of pale waterweed. Come on, I said, trying to hide my horror. Come on, let's get you back to your room. Too cold to be out. I looked down and saw that she was barefoot. My own slippers were inadequate to the chill radiating off the stairs. I couldn't imagine how cold her feet must be. I'd have picked her up and carried her, but I was afraid that I'd do her more injury than good. Come on, Maddie. She breathed out something, almost a word, but I could not make it out. Then her eyes rolled in the candle flame, and I thought she might collapse. I tried to catch her in my free hand, but she straightened and said, Roderick? No, it's Easton. Oh. She blinked up at me, her eyes huge in the light of the candle. Oh, yes, of course. Hello, Alex. Lifted one bird-like hand to her face. You were sleepwalking. Was I? Looked around. Yes, of course, I must have been dreaming. Oh, excuse that yawn, my God. Shall I take you back to your rooms? She looked down at the stairs. That's not necessary. Please, I said, for my peace of mind. It's cold and I'll stay up all night thinking you've frozen solid, and they'll find you in the morning looking like one of the Elgin marbles. She laughed a little, as I had intended. Not one of the ones without a head, I hope. If you fall down the stairs and your head shatters, I shan't be held responsible. Come on. I took my arm through hers and tugged her gently back up the steps. She followed reluctantly, still glancing over her shoulder at the stairs. Really, Alex, I'm fine. I'm sorry to have disturbed you. I caught her gaze, and there was something odd and furtive about her expression. I drew her arm a little more firmly than through mine, seized with a wild notion that she might suddenly bolt. But I saw her to the door of her room, and she kept step beside me. Your maid should be warned that you sleepwalk, I said as I released her. My maid. Yes. She drifted through the doorway into the dark. My own feet and heart were heavier as I made my way back. I found I could not sleep. The air seemed suddenly close and stifling for all its chill. I pictured the hangings around the bed like great mushroom gills dripping unseen spores down on my face. Ugh. No wonder Maddie went sleepwalking. I twitched the bed curtain aside and grabbed for my dressing gown. Perhaps some fresh air would help. Miss Potter had helpfully explained that there were fungal spores everywhere in the air, but if I didn't have to see them, I could ignore them. I opened the door and made my way onto the balcony at the end of the hall, overlooking the lake. The lake was full of reflected stars. Strange water gave them a faint green tinge, flickering slightly as I watched. Probably from ripples. Not that the ghastly lake ever seemed to ripple when I watched. I looked up away from the water, hoping to find an anchor in the familiar constellations. There were no stars. I believe I stared for at least half a minute while this knowledge worked slowly through my brain. It was an overcast night. The sky was dark gray with a sliver of moon just edging through. I looked back down, lake full of stars. Once, on a ship through the Mediterranean, I saw the sea glow with 1,000 motes of blue light. Plankton, the first mate told me. Bioluminescent plankton. After he walked away, one of the sailors says, "Don't listen to him, sir. The dead carry lanterns down in the deep." The light in the lake was akin to that light in the sea, though more green than blue. Hundreds of individual glowing dots with no discernible source. Glowing plankton? Did that happen in lakes? I had no idea. Perhaps Miss Potter would know. I gripped the edge of the balustrade. As I watched, I began to make out a pattern in the lights. The faint flicker was a sequence, not merely the motion of the water. A dot would brighten and then fade, and then the next one next to it would do the same, giving the appearance of a light jumping along the track. Then it would begin again at the beginning. The light seemed to outline multiple flat, irregular sheets standing on the edge of the water. I leaned forward, peering into the depths, and it seemed like there might actually be something there. Something that reflected light just a hair differently than the rest of the water. Although it would have been a transparent substance. Piece of glass? Gelatin? Whatever made some parts of the water surface appear matte during the day? The moon edged out from behind the cloud, but the lights did not halt. If anything, they grew brighter and more frenzied. Algae, Miss Potter had said dismissively. Did algae have leaves made of jelly and outlined in light? Lights on the Mediterranean had been beautiful. Perhaps if I had seen these on a ship, I would have found them beautiful as well. But in this dark, miserable lake, in this grim, blighted land, it was just one more unpleasantness. Perhaps this was even the source of Madeline's ailment. She had put her feet in the lake, and God knew what kind of poison such things exuded in the water around them. I turned away. Behind me, the lake continued to pulse and dance under the worried sliver of moon. Man, I swear to God, I'm walking the halls. What imagery in this book. Moon, you're exactly right. The imagery in this is just fantastic. This one, that particular chapter had me really thinking about the inside of the castle. And then they gave me a year, 1890, which is actually more modern than I thought. I was thinking like early 1800s. No, there was a noise on. Hold on. My apologies. I was unaware that I had a noise on for it. I will figure out how to turn that off. It's right here, right now. Bear with me just a moment. It probably would mess up my voice, yeah. I turned off the mute event sounds. That's it right there. I got it. I muted the event sound, so I believe that'll stop it from. I haven't heard anything since I turned it off, so I think that'll do her. Thank you for letting me know. I didn't have much. I didn't have much insight there. I'm just in Streamlabs. Now to continue. We're in chapter 6. This will be probably the last one that I read for the night. Let's see how many pages this short chapter. We might go 7. We'll see. We'll see how we feel at the end of 6. If something stirs in my gut, then I may continue. Now chapter 6. The next day was good. I say this because it stands out so starkly alongside the rest. The house was still damp and dark and falling down around us. Maddie and Roderick still looked like a pair of corpses headed for the beer, but still didn't know whether to stand up when I entered the room or not, but still, it was good. Roderick played the piano and we sang badly together. Maddie's voice was barely a thread, and I can just belt out the chorus to Galatia Will Go On. Somebody else handles everything else past the first verse. Didn't know most of our songs, and we knew none of his. But none of that particularly mattered. Saying something about John Brown's body, and I picked up enough to bellow, "Glory, glory, hallelujah," at the appropriate moments. Roderick was a genius on the piano, though. When we had exhausted ourselves mangling popular tunes, he played dramatic compositions by great composers. Mozart, Beethoven, why are you asking me? It was music. Dun 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 dun. What more do you want me to say? It was fun. People get hung up on happiness and joy, but fun will take you at least as far as it's generally cheaper to obtain. We had fun. Maddie laughed and clapped her hands, and there was color in her cheeks. I had hoped like hell that the beef had having some effect, even if the cook had to use mortar fire to tenderize the beast. Maddie went to bed, and I broke out a bottle of Liverit. Liverit was a Galatian specialty. It means it's uniquely terrible. It strongly resembles vodka, although vodka would be ashamed to acknowledge the connection. Sweetened as Liverit is, with the cloudberries that grow in the mountains. That might actually be palatable, though, and we can't have that, so lichen was also included. The resulting drink starts syrupy, ends bitter, and burns all the way down. God damn, that sounds terrible. Sorry, I feel like I tasted that. That is... That's fucking gnarly, dude. Oh my god. Ooh. No one actually likes it, but it is traditionally made by widows as a means of supporting themselves, so everyone drinks it because you can't let little old ladies starve to death when they could be climbing mountains and scraping lichen off rocks instead. Every Galatian soldier I know carries at least one bottle of liver, one bottle of liver with con. It reminds people that we are part of a great and glorious tradition of people doing gallant things in the service of a country that can't find its ass with both hands and a map. Being as I was an officer, I carry 3 in case I run into some poor sod who's drunk con only bottle. We toasted Galatia and Moravia and Denton gagged, and Roderick and I cheered on this completely normal response to Liverit. Then we toasted America, the taste buds her son had lost that day. Then we toasted a couple more things, including Maddie's beauty, fallen comrades, and the foolishness of armies. And then we parted and went to bed, and that was the last remotely normal day in the House of Usher. I was just sitting down on the bed to pull my boots when I heard the creak of floorboards outside my room. Was it truly that late? We'd been carousing for a few hours, long enough that Maddie might have begun sleepwalking again. I shoved my foot back in the boot and threw open the door. "Oh," I said, startled. "It's you." Den looked at me in mild surprise. "You were expecting someone else?" "I thought you might be Madeline." Belatedly, it occurred to me how that must sound, as if I was expecting Maddie to visit my rooms in the night. "I found her sleepwalking the other night." "Really?" Den frowned. I had not known that she did that. Roderick said something about her walking the halls, but I thought... "I know," I said, closing my door behind me. "She doesn't seem well enough to walk much of anywhere without help. I was afraid she would faint or fall down." "Did you wake her?" "I did. I know you're not supposed to wake a sleepwalker, but she thanked me. Said she'd been dreaming." This place breeds nightmares, said Denton with unexpected savagery. I need some air. I'll join you, I said. The livery was burning off, and I had no desire to sober up in the closeness of my room. The balcony overlooking the lake had little appeal, but it was at the back of my mind that perhaps Denton would see the strange lights too. I haven't been sleeping well myself. Once we were outside in the open air, I asked, "What did you mean this place breeds nightmares?" "Roderick," said Denton, leaning against the stone railing, "complains of nightmares, says the walls breathe them out." I did not know about the walls, but I could definitely imagine the lake doing so. No matter how innocent the water looked right now, I could not shake the memory of those strange transparent sheets and the outlines of rippling light. "Have you had any?" It was not a question I would normally ask someone that I knew as little as I knew Denton, but there are things two old soldiers can talk about in the dark after drinking that Kyle would never discuss in daylight. "I had a nightmare last night," said Denton, not looking at me. The lake reflected the stars back, dark and still. I was back at the surgical tent, amputating, after a battle. The way the rifle bullets shattered limbs. Take off dozens a day. The orderlies would carry them away, but we had to move so fast before the men bled out, so they would end up outside the tent in a pile. I was looking at that pile, and so many severed limbs, but they were alive. They were moving. "Good God," I said, horrified. They were still alive, and I realized we shouldn't have cut them off. If I could just take them back to their owners, I could put them back on. Make those men whole again. But there were so many, and there was a crowd of soldiers begging me to help them, and I didn't know which leg or arm went with which person, and there were so many men, and I couldn't help any of them. His voice trailed off. Stuttered. "I'm sorry," I said. "I don't dream about the war much anymore," he said. "It was a long time ago, and a lot longer for me than yours was for you, I imagine. But you won't always dream of it, if you're worried." I nodded. I certainly wasn't going to bother to deny it. I had been good at being a soldier, better than I had been at being anything else. And I'd always thought that if you were going to have stupid, bloody wars, it was better to have people who were good at it doing the fighting. People who knew what to expect and when to die for cover and when to run. People who knew what it looked like when their buddy took a bullet and could staunch the bleeding instead of standing around with their mouths hanging open. But there's a price you pay for being good at some things. The war is the backdrop to most of my dreams. The house I grew up in, my grandmother's cottage, and the war as if it was a place that I lived. I can't even say they're all nightmares. Sometimes it's just where the dream is happening. Didn't know. Roderick might. I don't know. He had always been jumpy. Nothing wrong with that. Jumpy means you survive. But it also means you wear yourself out faster and drive the rest of your unit nuts, but everybody copes in their own way. He was never going to be a career soldier, but that's fine. Not everyone should be. Ideally, nobody would have to be, but that's a bigger problem that I could tackle than I could tackle today. I looked down into the still water. No glow tonight. I wondered if I could convince myself it had been a dream. The place breeds nightmares. No, I knew what I had seen. I'm not a particularly fanciful person. A French woman once told me that I had no poetry in my soul. I recited a dirty limerick to her, and she threw a lemon at my head. Paris is a marvelous city. If I was no longer able to distinguish between dreams and waking, then something was wrong with me as well as with the ushers. "What do you think of this lake?" I asked Denton abruptly. "It's a dismal thing," said Denton. If he was surprised by my change of topic, he didn't say anything. "I think a pristine mountain lake would be picturesque. The ones in Galatia are. I only popped over the border once, I think. Place with the turnips on the shutters, right?" I muttered something in defense of turnips and stared into the water. "It's like it doesn't reflect light." "The lake?" Denton leaned forward over the balustrade and gazed down. "Possibly. Or what it's reflecting is so depressing that it doesn't help. I don't know. Reminds me of some of the springs we have in the States. Fantastic colors from the minerals leached into it, and it'll kill you dead if you drink from it." He straightened up, though I suppose it would have done so by now, since I imagine it's where all the water's drawn from. I grimaced. I hadn't given that any thought. Something in the tarn was poisoning Madeline. It was in all of our veins now. I felt vaguely queasy, even though I knew it was my imagination. I thought I saw lights in it the other night. Lights, he said. He looked over at me, surprised. I wished I hadn't said anything. Clearly the liver had loosened my tongue. Like reflections of stars, only it was overcast and there weren't any stars to be had. I don't know. And once I looked at them, they seemed to pulse. Remind me of the lights you get in the sea sometimes. I was downplaying it tremendously, but it sounded completely mad when I said it aloud. I should have spoken with Miss Potter first and gotten some scientific words to use as a talisman. The Englishwoman that's been roaming around painting mushrooms thinks there's some kind of algae in the water. Huh. Didn't look down at the water. Doesn't surprise me, I suppose. Any damn thing could grow in that lake and it wouldn't surprise me. I joined him in gazing down over the edge. It was dark and still and silent. Madeline nearly drowned in that lake a few months ago, said Denton, absent. What? Roderick didn't tell you. For a moment he looked as if he too had wished he hadn't said anything. Then he shrugged. She claims she doesn't remember. Had an episode and fell in. Roderick was certain she drowned when he pulled her out, but ironically, the catalepsy may have saved her. She didn't draw in any water into her lungs, you see. Christ's blood. I remembered the white shape of Madeline on the shore of the lake. Why was she still visiting the thing alone? Speak to her. Though surely she must be aware of the dangers. I was caught up in my thoughts and almost missed a greenish flicker in the depths. There, did you catch that? Saw something. There it is again! Be damned. Denton leaned so far over the railing that I thought I might have to grab him and pull him back. Huh. We both gazed into the water for a long time, but there were no more lights to be seen. Eventually we parted ways and went back to our respective beds. I don't know how Denton fared, but for me, sleep was still a long time coming. Got this over real quick. It was early in the morning when I heard the floorboards creak. Christ, the bloody things were better than the doorbells. This time the steps were halting and slow. I knew it wasn't Denton. I'd actually managed to sleep a few hours, and I am ashamed to admit that for a moment I thought of simply ignoring the sounds and going back to sleep. Liverett has a bite like a distempered mule, even if you're used to it. But chivalry demanded that I get up, because those light, tentative footsteps could have only been Maddie. She had left the hall by the time I pulled out my dressing gown, but it did not matter. I had a fairly good idea of where she was going. I caught up to her halfway down the stairs. Her walk was stiff and strange, starting and stopping the movements at odd places. It put me in mind of something, though I could not think of what. More importantly, it meant that she was slow on the steps, and my stomach clenched at how easy it was for her to fall. Madeline, you're sleepwalking again. She turned to look at me, her eyes again bright but unfocused. Ooh, she breathed. It's me. Remember? Madeline swung her head from side to side. Didn't look like she was shaking her head exactly. Her whole neck moved. It reminded me of the way Hob swings his head to shake off flies. Ooh. Another odd swinging motion. Who it? Realization dawned. Too many. Her lips moved as if they were stiff and the M sound was barely there, while the rest were drawn out. Too many. Many what? Ooh. He stretched a hand toward me, pointing. Too many words? I tried to simplify. Easton. Easton. Madeline seemed to relax, as if I had finally grasped what she was asking. Yes, that's right. Was it the catalepsy? Denton had said she became paralyzed to the point of coma, but this was another symptom? Were her lips and perhaps the joint at the top of her neck unable to move? Could she not focus her eyes and see who I was? Or was she still sleepwalking and this was all a symptom of the dream? I took her arm in case she might fall. I barely dared touch the skin, but I could feel the fine, dead white hair tickling against my palm. 1, said, 2, 3, 4, 5. She paused as if thinking. 7, 8, 9. He looked at me. Good. Very good, I said, wondering what the hell was going on. She nodded, throwing her head up and down as violently as a horse fighting a bit. Hard, she said. Breath moving hard. Breath moving hard, I translated internally, after a moment of puzzlement. Was she saying it was hard to breathe? Had she been counting breaths? Then she smiled, and it was terrible. Madeline's lips pulled up at the corners in a terrible parody of good humor, her mouth stretching painfully wide, her jaw dropped so far that it looked like almost to a scream. Above that awful grin were eyes as flat and dead as stones. I do not delude myself that I have seen every way the human mind can fail, though. I've seen 100 ways that soldiers and civilians can break in war, but I had never seen a smile like that. Stumbled backward, dropping her arm. This was the faintest of ripping sensations against my fingers. It was so unexpected that I looked down and saw my hand covered in the fine white hair from her arms. Dear God, had I closed my hand and pulled it out by the roots? No. When I looked in horror at her forearm, there was a handprint of bare flesh left behind. Each finger was visible, the outline of my thumb against her wrist, but I had not left a bruise. Had it been so shallowly rooted to the skin that my merest touch had torn it free? The new horror replaced the old. I looked up and she no longer wore that horrible grin. Oh, Maddie, I said, miserably, trying to wipe the hair off my trousers. It stuck to my sweating palms like cat hair. She shook her head again. No, Maddie. What? No, Maddie. She was clearly trying to enunciate, even though the M came out more like a Addie. She banged her wrist against her sternum and winced, expecting even the light pressure to leave bruises. No? What on earth was she dreaming about? Another flailing nod. One, said. Maddie, one, me, one, Maddie, me, two. Two, I agreed. She seemed to sag. Breathing hard, she muttered. I did not know whether to try and steady her or to avoid touching her again. You must be tired, I said sympathetically. Tired, she agreed. Let's go back to your room, I suggested. I took her shoulders where the cloth covered them, reluctant to touch her bare skin again for fear of tearing more hair loose. This way. Maddie allowed me to steer her back to her room. She pointed to things as we passed and named each one like a small child learning to speak. Wall. There. Handle. No maid greeted us when I pushed open the door to her room. Damnation. I led her to the bed, wondering how to get her to lie down without panicking her or leaving even more bruises. Down, I said, as if she were a dog. Let's lie down. Down. She agreed. The bed was a mess. I saw more hair everywhere on the sheets as it's been shedding. Christ's blood. It was never a good sign when people's hair falls out. I would have to tell Denton. Unfortunately, once I got Maddie into bed, I realized that I had no idea which room was his. There were 100 doors in this great hulk. I could go about yelling, I suppose, but what was Denton going to do tonight that he wouldn't do in the daylight? I was halfway back to my room before I realized Maddie's stilted walk, what Maddie's stilted walk had reminded me of. It was the hair. And that's chapter 6. Holy shit, was that creepy. Holy shit. That ending there was a bit jarring, no? That ending there was a bit, it was a bit much. The smile, I think, is what had my stomach, feeling some kind of way. I don't know how to turn the sound off, I'm sorry. That was creepy, so that's why I want to stop. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know what's going on with the sound. I'll figure the sound out later, I'm sorry. I'll edit it out of the out of the odds. But man, what a show. But that's where we'll leave off for now. Tomorrow night we'll pick up on chapter 7, and I'm going to be left wanting tonight. That was fun. That was so fucking creepy. The smile, the wishes. I've tried to paint the best picture that I could of that, of the way she was talking, but the way this is written is, whoo, shit, has me jarred. But what a good time. What a wonderful read. This has been fantastic for me. I hope you guys enjoyed yourselves. Hope you had a good time. Good night. I love you.